Hello, and welcome to Imperial College Business School, a leading international business school focusing on helping business and the improvement of society through the power of innovative thinking. And we're doing that across a variety of areas, from digital transformation, thinking about how telecom equipment makers can become software firms, health innovation, what's the role of AI accelerating new drug development, but also future finance. If we think about fintech, how do we think about fintech, for example, so that you can hedge climate risk in as far place from London as Africa, but also entrepreneurship. How do you bring deep tech innovations that are not quite ready for venture capital into the market? And of course, sustainability and climate change, which actually brings us to today's event, which is welcoming you to the public launch of the new Leonardo Center on Business for Society, a living lab for businesses committed to lead the transition towards a sustainable future. And why is it that this new center is anchored in the business school and at Imperial College? And this is something that is actually quite important for us and goes back not only to our vision, but actually right down to our mission. Right? I mean, if we think about what we think and how we think about a business school, we think about ourselves as driving global business and social transformation through the fusion of business, technology, and an entrepreneurial mindset. So if we think about that, that's at the core of our mission. And if we think what's happening around us, we see that it's very clearly that business is changing. It was happening before, but certainly over these last couple of years with the coronavirus, with climate change, driving a very different visibility and civil action movements such as the Black Lives Matter, they've accelerated this process and reminded us all how much business has, of course, to think about profits, but also to think about its social dimension. And that, for us, as a business school, and one that wants to be engaged and engage in a way that's transformational, we've, of course, made sustainability a central theme to our strategy, to our positioning, and to the way that we work. And it's not just about the business school, actually the entire college, as I'm sure you'll hear in a moment from our president, Alice Cast. And this is present in various dimensions in the way that we conduct our research, in our education. We're one of the pioneers launching a master's in climate change and finance, but also outreach, initiatives such as a competition on ideas that can change 1 million lives. All of this is part of the way that we think about our responsibility as a leading business school. But it's also very visible that the way that we think about it in the business school is actually increasingly becoming more common among business leaders. And this has actually been very visible in our recent annual conference of the business school, which theme was on responsible leadership. And it was very interesting to see that, across the leaders that were present in our conference, how much it has become accepted, actually ingrained in their perspectives, that business is and needs to play a social dimension, and how much that is getting incorporated in the long-term goals that are put in place for what they want to achieve over the next few years. But the conference also demonstrated that there is a very important gap between perception, understanding, and even the strategic goals and the solutions that are needed, especially in areas like the environment, but not only. How do you really involve stakeholders in a productive and effective manner inside the corporation so that it can actually fulfill these social values? So we need to find solutions. And this is quite at the heart of Leonardo, and why Leonardo makes so much sense for the business school. If we want to drive innovation, if we want to drive change, this is exactly about what Leonardo is. And this is, to lead this exploration and experimentation into this new logic of business as a central actor for the improvement of society. It's about research, about education and engagement with that purpose, and solutions that can work for business. And this is actually true, for the business school across all areas. But when connect to this area, it becomes particularly pertinent, to do it in the context of Imperial, because a lot of the solutions about, this future of business and this different position for business are going to relate to health, to engineering, to natural sciences. And it's about bringing those solutions and shifting them and disseminating them in the business context that Leonardo can play an important role, and to do it not only with the context of the business school, but in the broader context of Imperial. And we're already playing that role, but this is the debut, the official launch, and the invitation to many of you to join us in this transition and in this agenda, which is so important for the business school, but more important for the business and for the world. So before I hand it over to the next speaker, just a couple of remarks. So first, to thank our speakers today for accepting to be with us and on this journey and on the launch of Leonardo. And I'd like also to thank and congratulate the team behind Leonardo, in particular Mauricio Zolo and Livio Scalpini, to really all the effort that has been today behind launching the center, not just on what happened today, but what's going to be happening over the last few months and will happen over the last few years. And certainly thank you, our audience, from joining. And the delegates that are watching us, our live stream on YouTube, there's not going to be question and answers on the keynote speakers, but I'd really like to invite you to get engaged in the opportunity through Q&A around the roundtables. They're designed precisely to give you that opportunity to be involved and to contribute as well. And this invitation will continue on beyond today to just join us in the many initiatives that Leonardo is going to have over the next few years. So thank you, everybody. And now let me hand it over to Alice Guest, the president of Imperial College London. And I'd very much like to thank Alice for accepting our invitation to be here opening this event with myself, and more importantly, to thank you for all the support that you've had to the business school and Leonardo in its journey so far and into the future. Thank you, everybody. Have a great session, and looking forward to see you in many other events.
Well, thank you very much, Francisco. I'm very honored to join you today to launch the Leonardo Center on Business for Society. It's a great new addition to Imperial College London Centers for Excellence. These centers galvanize a critical mass of researchers, and they transcend faculty boundaries to make progress and challenges through multidisciplinary collaboration. As you've said, the Leonardo Center is a living lab for business, committed to learning and leading the transition toward a sustainable future. It's a novel and ambitious initiative to fundamentally shift our logics of enterprise for the future of humankind. We're launching this pioneering new collaborative model, which will help redefine businesses for society. The college's academic strategy helps us realize our ambition to ensure that research, teaching, and innovation delivers transformative impact for societal benefit on a global scale. Business is central to all the 4 dimensions of social well-being that define our strategy. We aim to build a sustainable, healthy, smart, and resilient society. The strategy draws upon our groundbreaking fundamental research, our creativity, imagination, and ability to develop new insights and knowledge to help improve our world. This is underpinned by our 4 capabilities that enable excellence. As you know, Imperial is a very multidisciplinary institution. We are quantitative, we are entrepreneurial, and we are engaged. Our capabilities are the enduring bedrock of everything we do. The Leonardo Center on Business for Society will be an essential node in connecting a network of all of our relevant centers and institutes of scientific excellence with the necessary transition of the purpose of business and society. The center joins a network of 15 research centers, integrating work from environmental policy to health economics and policy innovation, and connecting a global community of more than 150 scholars in 60 universities around the world. We are committed to leveraging our knowledge across disciplines to address some of the most pressing societal challenges, and notably, the Leonardo Center will identify new opportunities to deliver transformative impact on a global scale. Attracting new collaborations, comment, and discussion through publications and provocative working papers, the Center will become a hub of activity within and beyond our university. Collaboration is vital to achieving the Center's mission. The Center is an open invitation to private and public partners in business, policymakers, civil society, and academia to join us to co-create, experiment, and scale innovative ways to transition the role of businesses in society. We welcome you all to share your priorities with us, to engage in collaborative research programs, and to support the Center. Your sectorial expertise, skills, advice, and resources will complement ours. Together, we can drive our common or overarching research agenda for a more equitable, prosperous, and sustainable future. We are delighted to have the support of Mark Carney, the United Nations Special Envoy on Climate Action and Finance. While Mark couldn't join us for the launch today, he has recorded a video for us to enjoy now. Thank you.
Thank you, Alice. It is a great pleasure for me to be here at the launch of the Leonardo Center. The center exists to co-design, to test, and to scale new forms of enterprise for sustainable and fair society. Those of you here today and those of you working at the center know that companies have stakeholders that serve their employees, their shareholders, creditors, customers, suppliers, and communities, but also that companies themselves are stakeholders. They have interests in and share responsibility for the economic, social, and environmental systems in which they operate. And these joint responsibilities are brought to the fore at times of great change, such as what we're living through today with the tectonic changes in technology and economic processes that are being driven by the Fourth Industrial Revolution, and the shifting geopolitics that could foster a reversal in globalization and the changing social norms, including renewed imperatives for social justice and equity. So the establishment of the Leonardo Center couldn't be more timely. The most purposeful companies recognize that their objectives must be aligned with those of society and that their actions will help determine whether society can achieve its goals, including, for example, environmental sustainability by reaching net zero. A company exists to solve problems for people, and that includes our planet. A purposeful company defines and enshrines this mission. It creates a strategy to deliver its purpose. It makes corporate decisions from hiring to R&D spending based on furthering that purpose. And it aligns incentives around its purpose. It engages all its stakeholders, its employees, its suppliers, customers, communities, and shareholders with that purpose, and recognizes the art in delivering purpose is not to unfairly or unjustly favor one group of stakeholders at the expense of another. So the question is how to best deliver that purpose, how to embed it in governance, and what structures will support a more stakeholder-oriented business model. And this is where the Leonardo Center and its work will add enormous value. The center's 5 areas of focus: purpose and governance, leadership and culture, business model innovation, corporate and functional strategies, and control and incentive systems will support the businesses of the future that will better serve society and help achieve its goals. For the work that we're all involved on climate change, I know that these building blocks are critical. In my view, given that net zero is both an imperative of climate physics and on the road to becoming law of the land in over 120 countries, any business strategy must be grounded in a plan to support that transition to net zero. Investors, banks, indeed society will increasingly differentiate between companies that meet the gold standard for transition plans and those that don't, and which companies are committed to turning those plans into action. For COP26, we're working on creating a financial system that ensures that every financial decision takes climate change into account. It's one that's built on the 3 R's of reporting, risk management, and returns, and the 1 M of mobilization of investment through new market structures. Across all of these pillars, we need to build expertise, improve efficacy, and collectively upskill. We need to share knowledge and to coordinate as time is short in order to address the climate crisis. I hope the Leonardo Center can support these objectives, just as I know it will support broader efforts to create a more fair, sustainable, and equitable society through business action. I look forward to engaging with your output and to supporting the work as we collectively embark on a more stakeholder-oriented model of business to solve society's broader and common problems. Thank you very much. Congratulations and good luck.
Humans have achieved incredible things, but we have taken our planet to the brink. And now the primary risk to our own survival is ourselves. It's time to change. In order to thrive and survive in a new age, we must redesign a path to progress that respects the intertwined fate of people and planet. The Leonardo Center on Business for Society, established by Imperial College, sees a world where companies work for a more sustainable tomorrow. Here we explore and experiment with the transition of sustainable and inclusive logics of enterprise. As Leonardo da Vinci had a vision of perfection in man, we are developing a leadership ideal to shape a new direction. At the Leonardo Center, we will innovate and co-create a new logic of business enterprise to deliver the world we want. We will redesign systems to be environmentally, socially, and economically regenerative. With 15 Imperial College research centers and a global community of 150 scholars, we will pull from the most brilliant scientific and business expertise. Using the world's largest machine learning dataset on corporate sustainability behaviors, we can connect the dots and shift behaviors where science tells us. Business can pave the way to a more sustainable future. And at the Leonardo Center on Business for Society, we're taking the lead. Join us today.
Today, we are launching a new and groundbreaking initiative, the Leonardo Center for Business in Society. As the chair of the Leonardo Center board, I would like to give my heartfelt thanks to the Imperial College London for their generous foresight in establishing this critically important new initiative. Your timing is truly catalytical. We are at an inflection point. Just last week, G7 leaders met in Cornwall to accelerate ambitions for climate, nature, and resilient global economy that will deliver prosperity and well-being for all people. They emphasize the power of democracy, freedom, equality, the rule of law, and respect for human rights to answer the biggest questions and overcome the greatest challenges. This is a global movement and a wake-up call. In the lead up to COP26, many of the world's largest and most influential businesses are committing to decarbonize their value and supply chains. And investors and stakeholders are challenging the greatest CO2 emitters to significantly raise their ambition. The human race is extraordinary for its resilience. In fact, throughout the ages, some of the greatest leaps forward for humanity have happened after deep and enduring crises. I'm very hopeful that while COVID-19 has rocked the foundation as a global community, it has also brought a sense of enlightenment, of urgent need to transform the way we consume, invest, and live together in the global society. Renaissance man Leonardo da Vinci has inspired the Leonardo Center. The Renaissance changed the world in just about every way we can think, to make sense of the world, of light and shadow, of human anatomy, the laws of gravity, of cosmos and how we fit into it, the coming together of art, philosophy, and science collectively, push the boundaries of what we know and what we can achieve. Now we need a new renaissance to help us make sense of the rapidly changing world and our own role in it. Importantly, we need a new logic of enterprise that sets out to establish that economies thrives when humanity thrives, that humanity can only prosper when the planet and everything living thrives as well, that the success of all of us hinges upon our ability to leave no one behind, that business wins when society wins. And we need to learn fast, collectively. The Leonardo Center will provide a strong platform for combining business experience and scientific research in sense of this new logic of enterprise. Importantly, Leonardo is an open invitation to the most pioneering and forward-looking businesses to learn, co-create, and experiment together with some of the world's leading minds and innovators in pursuit of answers to three grand challenges.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you all for being with us today. What I'm going to do is give you an overview of the major questions that we are going to tackle at Leonardo, and more importantly, how we're planning to tackle them. The major global problem, it's a problem for us as researchers as well as for you as businesses and institutions, is the consideration that even if, and that's a big if, even if business will have made their contribution so that governments by 2030 will have delivered on their commitments to sustainable development targets, well, even in that situation, we will still be living in a world where the business sector will be producing a net negative impact on both the natural and the social environment. So the question is, what is the logic of enterprise that today we don't have, but that could emerge over these next few years and maybe decades, that will actually include the Sustainable Development Goals in the way that we conceive of and run our businesses? This question is tackled at Leonardo in a number of ways. We're convinced that it is fundamentally an innovation and experimentation problem at the individual level, because we need to understand what are the most effective ways to develop the leadership mindset, at the organizational level, and then at the systemic level. The way we're going to do it is with a number of assets, research assets, of course, the expertise by a number of networks of experts, scientific experts. We also have a unique digital data set on sustainability initiatives. And we have these, we are developing these experimental designs, as I said, across all the levels, the individual, experimental, organizational, and systemic levels. Now, for what concerns the network of expertise, we have two networks actually. One is local, here at Imperial College, 15 different research centers and institutes spanning all the relevant knowledge areas, from climate change, pollution. We have a major zero pollution society program, again collaborative, and all the way to health, well-being, and encompassing all sorts of methodological expertise, including the Data Science Institute, which is hosting us today, and to which obviously we are extremely grateful. At a global level, we have been developing over the years an international, a global network of about 150 scholars over 60 different universities, again including the most reputed ones. Now, for what concerns the data, the Leonardo Center has been collaborating with its partners to develop what we consider a unique digital data set, leveraging cutting-edge machine learning algorithms to not only identify all the sustainability reports that are available on the internet, but actually to read and analyze, categorize each and every one of the initiatives, the language describing the initiatives that companies undertake. And it categorizes these initiatives in three ways. The first one is the objective, and we're using the Sustainable Development Goal as a way to think about the objective and categorize them. The second has to do with the actual action, right? The behavior that is put in place by the company in order to deliver that particular initiative. And finally, we categorize also the beneficiaries, the stakeholders that will benefit from that initiative. Now, we currently, the machines are going, of course. We are looking to cover as many as about 20 million initiatives from about 15 to 20,000 companies. This is over 20 years, right? So we're talking about hundreds of thousands of sustainability reports. Importantly, though, they cover companies across the world and really across all sectors. But the important part is the mapping that we can now do between the Sustainable Development Goals, the objectives, and the behavior, right? We can analyze the evolution of corporate behavior aimed at contributing to the Sustainable Development Goals over the years, across each country and across all the sectors, comparing the evolutionary trajectories across sectors and across countries. Now, this is important from a research perspective, but let's look at the perspective of companies. There is one very important way to analyze the sustainability strategies of companies. So if you think about the accumulation of efforts and managerial attention to each and every one of the combinations between goals and action, it gives essentially a matrix, a portfolio of sustainability efforts that characterize each and every company. Not only that, but dynamically, we can use that characterization in order to explain why companies are actually performing in a certain way from a financial and non-financial standpoint. So this goes way beyond the current debate on materiality metrics, because it actually has a behavioral explanation for the capacity of companies to contribute on both fronts, on financial and non-financial fronts, social and environmental performance. Now, this at the overall, at the industry level, means that we can also estimate the optimal portfolio of initiatives, the optimal effort that companies in a specific sector can put in place in order to maximize both their financial and non-financial performance. Now, let's think about what that means. It means that for every sector, we will be able to not only characterize what they have been doing over the past 20 years across the objectives and across the various actions, but we will be able to compare that vis-a-vis the optimal portfolio of initiatives that companies could be putting in place in order to maximize both their financial and non-financial performance. And from there, it will generate essentially all the combinations of initiatives and goals where they could invest more, right, as you can see from the reds in the matrix, or invest less. They've overinvested essentially over the past years, and they can reallocate those resources. Now, this is really important in order to understand, study, but also support corporate efforts to understand from a quantitative and a scientifically sound perspective what they need to be considering, what they need to be doing in order to fine-tune their sustainability strategies. But in order to understand, to go the next level of detail and really understand what are the most appropriate change efforts, how they should go about tackling the transformational change across all the various elements of their enterprise logic, we need to think about the experimental platforms that Leonardo Center has put in place for them. So when it comes to enterprise logic innovation, at Leonardo Center, we've developed a whole host of experimental designs. We're taking a outside-in perspective from product and process innovations, interfacing with market, to the more inner change experimentations with strategy and organizational change. You can summarize this in three fundamental pillars. The innovation pillar obviously leverages the capacity, the collaboration of all our friends and colleagues in engineering, medical science, natural science, and data science. And then we take it in with experimental designs developed within the business school with particularly strategic, but also the leadership and cultural change and governance models. But beyond the scientific value of all of this, I would like you to understand a bit more in detail what this might mean from a business and an institutional perspective. Let me welcome Livio Scalvini, the Executive Director of our center, to give you a perspective on this and also conclude maybe with an action plan for the future. Livio, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maurizio. Thank you all for being with us today. So what we have seen so far are the research assets that we have developed. So the global network of expertise, the behavioral data, and the experimental models to support the transition of the company. But now the effort is going to focus on how we engage companies in this evolution. And in order to do that, we have designed a set of labs that can help at the individual level, at the organizational level, and at the ecosystem levels. But let's have a look at that. The first one is the enterprise labs. Enterprise labs are multi-stakeholder platforms to learn how the company can evolve towards a sustainable logic of enterprise. And in order to do that, we assess, we identify the optimal portfolio, but most of all, we design a roadmap that can help generate a portfolio of innovation that could tackle all the key functions within the enterprise in order to identify solutions at the business model, at the strategy, and at the leadership models that can be then successfully scaled within the enterprise. But this is not enough. We have to first look at a new generation of leaders that can drive this change. And in order to do that, we have developed the leadership labs. Leadership labs are conceived to support this evolution. We know which are the leadership traits that can drive this transition. Long-term vision, awareness of the social and environmental impact of our behaviors, the capacity to integrate stakeholder voice, stakeholder views in our decision-making process, and the capacity to collaborate for common good. But how can we nurture, how can we develop these traits? In order to do that, we have developed a set of interventions that can help identify the most effective ways to design this evolution. But organizations can tackle just some problems. If you're really looking at societal challenges, we need to have a more holistic intervention with the participation of all the stakeholders. And in order to do that, we have designed systemic labs. Systemic labs are collaborative platforms designed for leaders of business and institutions that are willing to drive systemic change within the organization and beyond their organization to tackle weak problems in zero pollutions, in climate change, in social inclusion, and in diversity in order to work on the evolution of their own sectors beyond the existing boundaries. And what we have done is, beyond the assessments and identification of the optimal portfolio, design collaborative ideation and design moments where stakeholders can design a set of intervention at the business model level with the strategic implication that can then be tested and successfully scaled for the transition not just of the company, but beyond the companies within all the other players in the ecosystem. But let's now focus not on what we have done, but what we are going to do in order to create systemic change. And so what we have seen is the setup phase. So how we have developed the data set, how we have built the networks and the experiment in order to build the fundamental blocks of our activities. Now what we would like to present to you is how we want to scale these startups to systemic impact. What we want to achieve in terms of moonshots, our contribution to the 2030 agenda. So what we have seen so far is the network of competencies, the data, the experimental models, but now we want to show how we can scale these assets and create systemic impact. So the first is the data. The aim is to develop these behavioral data sets up to 40 million initiatives, but also to measure the impact in terms of social and environmental effects of corporate behaviors. And most of all, to develop a new generation of sustainability indexes that can draw the pathways for companies and also provide tools for investors to allocate their funds. Secondly, we want to develop a new generation of leaders through executive programs that can help them drive the transition of their companies, to create a community of 100,000 managers through online education that can help their companies to thrive. We are looking at, through the enterprise labs, to create a community of 200 companies in key sectors that can not just move themselves towards sustainable logic of enterprise, but drive the value chain and their ecosystem beyond the tipping point. And create also an opportunity for policy intervention at a systemic level. And on this topic, we are developing a COP26 report that connects behavioral actions to climate change footprint at a country level. So this is our contribution to systemic change, but it's also the way we structure this event today. So there are 3 roundtables with wonderful panelists that will tackle these 3 major challenges. First is the one on the systemic evolution towards stakeholder capitalism. The second is on business evolution towards this new logic of enterprise the world needs. And the third one is on the leadership models that can support this evolution. And finally, we will present our call to action, the collaboration between all stakeholders to drive this systemic change. But now, let me introduce you Andrew Jack, that is Global Education Editor of the Financial Times, who will shepherd us through the rest of the day.
Hello and welcome. My name is Andrew Jack from the Financial Times, and it's a pleasure to host this next few sessions where we're going to cast the net wider and look externally at some of the key challenges that we're facing going forwards. We'll have some great keynotes, and we'll have 3 separate challenge sessions to address systemic challenges, the leadership challenge, and the business transition challenge over the next couple of hours, as we start to reflect on the need to evolve the role of academia as well as leaders and business more generally, what we need to change, what the key drivers are of that change, and indeed what role the Leonardo Center can play as part of that agenda. But first of all, it's a great pleasure to hand over to Sander Odhiambo, the Chief Executive of the UN Global Compact, for some introductory thoughts.
Greetings, I'm Sander Odhiambo, the CEO and Executive Director of the United Nations Global Compact, and it's an honor to greet you today. Let me begin with warm regards and congratulations to Imperial College London for the launch of the Leonardo Center on Business for Society. The Center's founding vision of a society where companies pursue profit for societal impact parallels the mission of the UN Global Compact. In our case, as the world's largest corporate sustainability initiative, this means advancing 10 principles that span human rights, labor, the environment, and anti-corruption, core values for any sustainable business. All of our more than 12,000 participating companies and 3,000 non-business participants pledge to follow the 10 principles across their operations and their value chains. We also work with business leaders to embrace these principles as they respond to the COVID-19 crisis. When times get really tough, it's the principles that matter. To build forward from the pandemic, the business community needs a coordinated international plan. That plan has to incorporate the 10 principles, and it has to align with the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Paris Agreement on Climate. Academia, and business schools in particular, must be at the table to develop such a plan and ensure its success. We knew this long before COVID-19, and that's why in 2007, the UN Global Compact established the PRIME Initiative, Principles for Responsible Management Education. The initiative works with more than 800 business schools in 98 countries. All of their deans have signed on to integrate sustainable development into their research, curricula, and partnerships. I'm delighted that the new Leonardo Center at Imperial College London has a large group of dedicated researchers, and with them a large network of business leaders, equally dedicated to sustainable business management. The UN Global Compact welcomes your commitment. For a while, we've been telling each other that business as usual is not enough for a sustainable future. That is true, but we also need to start saying business school as usual is not enough either. It's no longer a matter of the more management education, the better. Now more than ever, it's the kind of management education we deliver to students that truly matters. Last year, the UN Global Compact worked with Russell Reynolds Associates to find out how businesses around the world are centering sustainability in their organizational culture and leadership. We identified some key factors to guide business management and management education in the 21st century. For example, we found out that sustainable business leaders base their strategies on societal and environmental factors, not market considerations or profit alone. They include a wide range of stakeholders in making and implementing decisions. They are not afraid to challenge traditional approaches and seek out innovative solutions. And finally, they set bold and long-term goals for sustainability, and they pursue them rigorously. As an institution with global influence, Imperial College London is well positioned to advance ideas like these. By supporting new models of business operation and governance, you're contributing to a more equitable future. The Leonardo Center can also help identify the strategic changes that businesses must make to transform themselves and recover from the current crisis. By enabling faculty and students to collaborate with business leaders on research for sustainable solutions, you can certainly help pave the way. For a just recovery that accelerates progress on the 2030 agenda and a green recovery that mitigates the existential threat of climate change. These are the overarching goals of the UN Global Compact's own strategy as well. I know we can achieve them together, with responsible companies and responsible business schools working hand in hand, united in the business of a better world. Once again, I wish you all the best for the Leonardo Center's important work in the years ahead. Thank you.
So welcome to our afternoon challenge session. We're going to have some keynote speeches, but we're going to have 3 different roundtable discussions with some key participants from academia, from business and beyond to engage around the systemic challenges, the business transition and the leadership challenge overall. 3 core grand challenges, and we're very keen during the discussion to bring in the many of you who are watching, so I would encourage you to post your reactions and your questions as we develop this afternoon's session here in London. A reminder, we're talking about the big grand challenges for society, particularly around sustainability and how we need to rethink capitalism, what the trends are, what needs to change, what are the trends that will help or hinder, and what is the role of the Leonardo Center. So our first challenge is the systemic challenge. What's the type of capitalism the world now needs? And it's a pleasure, first of all, to hand over some introductory remarks to Peter Bakker, the President and Chief Executive of the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. Peter.
Well, thank you very much. And let me start by congratulating the Imperial College Business School for the launch of the Leonardo Center on Business for Society and everyone that was involved in making this happen, obviously. I'm looking forward to what the Leonardo Center will accomplish with its unique mix of academia, business knowledge, and a deep understanding of sustainable development. It's important to prepare and train individuals that really can create profitable but also sustainable business opportunities in a world that is indeed undergoing transformational change, and that will focus on timely and accessibly applied research that drives sustainable business practices and behavior changes needed to address the 3 pressing global challenges that are out there. Contrary to the previous speaker, I do not believe that business as usual needs more. I believe business as usual is dead. We need transformational change. As mentioned, there are 3 pressing global challenges: the climate emergency, the loss of nature, and growing inequality. Each of them on its own can endanger the safe operating space for humanity, as science is telling us, but also the license to operate for business. And if there's one thing that we have learned from the COVID pandemic, it is how interconnected these challenges actually are. Action to address these challenges and accelerate the transition to a sustainable world is urgently needed now. If we are to achieve the SDGs and the Paris Agreement, the goal to limit global warming well below 2 degrees or even 1.5 degrees, we need action now. To do that, to mobilize that systemically, we need a long-term vision. For that reason, we've recently published Vision 2050, Time to Transform. In that report, we said the vision for 2050 is 9+ billion people living well within planetary boundaries. Achieving this, relatively simply worded vision will require a wholesale transformation of everything we have grown up with. Energy needs to decarbonize, materials need to go circular, food needs to be produced sustainably and equitably, and provide healthy diets. And therefore, the concept of system transformation is now crucial. Everyone in sustainability is talking about it, but now we need to back it up with action. Hence, the report focuses on 9 pathways of system transformation, all written in an actionable format. Business, as we know, plays a central role in delivering products and services that society needs. For each of these products and service categories, we've created a transformation pathway with a concrete vision and an actionable agenda. Let me give you a few examples. We can power a net zero world with a sustainable energy system that provides reliable and affordable net zero carbon for all. We can all invest in our future with all financial capital and financial products and services mobilized to support sustainable development. We can feed a healthy world with regenerative and equitable food system, producing healthy, safe, and nutritious food for all. This vision and the transformation pathways, they are obviously aligned with the SDGs and the targets of the Paris Agreement. Each of these pathways contains 10 action areas for the decade ahead. So this is not just talking about Vision 2050, this is really action areas for the decade that are ahead. What we're mindful of is that these pathways will not come about without a fundamental change of thinking. And therefore, we have identified 3 critical strategic business mindset shifts. The first one is reinvention of capitalism. The second, resilience. And the third one, regeneration. That will be the difference between incremental change in business as usual and the accelerated system transformation necessary to achieve this long-term vision. The most critical of these mindset shifts, and I'm really happy that that's one of the important topics you're going to discuss this afternoon, is about the reinvention of capitalism. This shift will ensure that the economic system, our incentives, the global accounting standards, and the capital market valuations will no longer just be based on the financial performance of business, enterprise value. The move to a capitalism of true value for all will accelerate the transition to a world where 9+ billion people living well within planetary boundaries faster than anything else. Of course, business cannot make these transformations happen on its own. It's important to work together with the scientific community and academia to understand where we need to go, with government and policymakers to accelerate getting there. And in that context, the launch of the Leonardo Center on Business for Society will greatly contribute to this. With its research, its thought leadership, the center will advance the understanding and adoption of the best practices in sustainable business, helping leaders to ensure that their organizations combine high financial performance with this positive impact on society. Together with Vision 2050's positive and, I believe, inspiring foundations, business and its stakeholders, including business schools and academia, can come together to advance the transformation that we now need. It's time to transform. It's time to think systems. It's time to create true value now. It's really great to be part of the launch, and I wish you great success. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Peter, for some great provocative opening thoughts. So we're going to go now into a roundtable discussion. Unfortunately, we've got one panelist currently missing, but we have Professor Tommaso Valletti, Dr. Marisa Meraldo, and Frederic Samama with us, as well as I think still Peter around over the next 25 minutes or so. And a reminder, do please post those who are watching your reflections and questions for this first session. So let me start with you, Tommaso, and we're gonna move down to become a bit more granular later, including around the role of the Leonardo Center, and of course in the next transition session we'll talk specifically about business. But let's keep it big picture initially and talk about capitalism itself and the systemic issues that we're facing. Do you agree with Peter that really it's the end of business as usual? We really need to completely overhaul the current system?
Thank you very much, and I'm also very happy to be here for the launch of the Leonardo Center. It's a fantastic opportunity and great questions which are being asked. Yes, I am in agreement. I'm an economist, and I have to remind ourselves that there has been a debate for the past 50 years that started with Milton Friedman, that very famously said that the social responsibility of business is to increase profits. To be fair, he also added subject to the regulations in place. But that became the kind of mantra that corporations should maximize shareholders' value, and became mainstream for a long period. Some other economists, also as famous, very famous, perhaps not as Milton Friedman that got the Nobel Prize, but Michael Jensen and Kevin Murphy, at some stage estimated that the contribution of CEOs was great to the wealth of formation of companies, and but for every $1,000 of value created by CEOs, they would get only, I still remember, $3.25. So there was this narrative that CEOs did not get enough. Okay, that was only 50, 40, and 30 years ago. And then we saw the results. Basically, corporations started downsizing workforces. They started limiting wage growth, offshoring tasks. And that was all in the name of delivering better value for shareholders. And you will hear a lot of people that still nowadays will say that that is the main job of corporations. What Milton Friedman did not see, though, are, first of all, that yes, he alluded to regulations, but those regulations can be impacted by the lobbying of the same firms because of the incredible power they might get. What also Friedman didn't see was also the many externalities that firms make, and these externalities should be contrasted by appropriate regulations. But again, these regulations are not enacted enough. So the concepts that you heard earlier, resilience, mindset, that's great. That means also having to go at the core of some business models which are currently in place. And the business models sometimes are toxic. If I have to think about my area of expertise, which is big tech, and I have to take Facebook, Google, these are models which are basically trying to get our attention, get us online 3, 4, 5 hours a day in order to understand about us and then extract a signal when it is best to send us some ads. That's basically the business model, which we know is very successful, but that's not a very healthy one. So the solutions are available. So there is now, which model should be adopted perhaps is less obvious. What I am concerned of is that currently there is a lot of corporate virtue signaling. So what I do not want to see is a new era of stakeholder capitalism, which means giving more discretion to CEOs. That's not what I want. I don't want CEOs, unaccounted CEOs, to tell me what are the global accounting standards or taxation standards or environmental standards or health standards. So what we lacked was an appropriate government intervention to remind us about the impact on society. So legislation is needed to set clearer red lines. It's great that there is a pressure now from civil society, and this is also the role of independent research institutions like Leonardo Center should precisely do that. Civic activism research, also talking, of course, to business leaders, but we have together to decide what is unacceptable corporate behavior, be it tax evasion, excessive automation, pollution, accounting tricks, health impact. So a new era is upon us, I think, but in a sense, corporate responsibility is too important to be left alone to corporate leaders. We've seen in the past, don't forget that 13 years ago in 2008, we had, colossal abuses during the financial crisis that went almost entirely unpunished. So no one has been put to jail. This is the headline in a newspaper, but it's more than that, of course. And we do not have to repeat those mistakes. So the challenge for all of us is really to understand what's different now, or is it just another wave of words that are used to do some signaling from a corporation, some sort of corporate value, corporate virtue signaling, but that would be a very bad outcome. I will leave it.
Okay, Tommaso.
Is that my initial remark? Thank you very much.
So thanks very much, and we'll come back to some of those prescriptions for change that you talked about with you and the other panelists in a minute. But let me just go around the others. Marissa, I mean, what's your perspective? Do you agree with Tommaso? I mean, do we need to basically completely overhaul capitalism? And if so, what is the new form of capitalism that we need?
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Yes, I couldn't agree more with Tommaso, and these recommendations are very pertinent in the context of health. That is my area of expertise. it hasn't been so salient as during the pandemic that the current capitalism system doesn't really deliver on health and well-being. We have globally millions of avoidable deaths and morbidity due to the lack of access to medicines, vaccines, diagnostics, treatments. And while this has been exposed by the pandemic, it's unfortunately a very long-lasting reality. So in a sense, the system has failed to enormously to produce health and well-being for entire populations. For example, many don't have access to treatment or prevention for their diseases, either because the markets of their diseases are not profitable, or because the markets are small, or when innovation exists, when treatments and prevention exists, they can't afford those treatments. A bit more generally, we know that a key driver of mortality and morbidity, even in high-income countries, is related to non-communicable diseases. Non-communicable diseases have a huge impact on productivity as well as the economy, and yet poor diets are fueled by the availability, the saliency, but also how cheap unhealthy foods are in comparison to healthy foods. So addressing these needs is first and foremost a moral imperative. It's not about profit, but it could also be about profit. It can also, we know that it's economically beneficial to promote health and well-being. So, for example, in the context of the current pandemic, the IMF has estimated that an investment of 50 billion in access and development of vaccines can lead to an additional global output 2025 of $9 trillion US. You know, that is fabulous economic impact. Now, while there is general consensus about these, the problem, and I think that is a symptom that the system doesn't really work, is that there's a lot of inertia for change. So I agree that the public, but also the private business as usual, is really not conducive of global development, nor it's fit to address global health challenges. And we need a radical change in our in that system, and in particular what relates to our innovation ecosystems. In terms of solutions, I think first, this was already mentioned here today, to create. Yes.
Sorry, just let me come back to solutions in just a second. Just to finish, but just to push back for you in 1 second, because some would argue, you know, is this actually a total failure of capitalism, or arguably, is it actually governments who failed more? If we look at the current pandemic, you know, you could say actually both the medicines that have been introduced and the new vaccines have come through the capitalist innovation system, haven't they? And it's in many ways been the failure of governments or many governments to sufficiently invest up front to de-risk and to produce them at scale that's been the biggest problem in at least tackling the epidemic, although we could sort of debate why it came about in the first place. So do you think it's quite fair to say we need to completely scrap the current system?
So when I say we should have we can't have business as usual. This is both for private and private sector. But you know, going into the example that you've cited, it's true that there could have been. I mean, the private sector is also to fault for the lack of vaccines. I mean, prevention is a key area that is, you know, historically not profitable in comparison to treatment. So the vaccines were not there. Also because it's you know, of excessive focus on profit and distribution of profit to shareholders. Now, you know, that's not to say that the public system doesn't need to, you know, to rethink their role, not only on innovation, but as Tommaso quite rightly said, on regulation, on legislation, and also on the device of newer incentive mechanisms that go beyond the current intellectual property, current intellectual property rights.
Okay, so Frederick, you're from Amundi Group. Business has taken a pretty big bashing from our first speakers. Do you agree things need to be completely overhauled? And is there a way to meaningfully get that balance right in terms of the creation and the distribution of value between different stakeholders for the broader social good?
Yes, good afternoon, Andrew. My answer will be at 3 levels first, and maybe we can talk about the solutions later. First, I think we must recognize that we are facing a new forms of risks. Actually, about 18 months ago, the BIS, the Banque de France, Patrick Bolton from Imperial College, and myself, we published a book entitled The Green Swan on climate change, because we wanted to make the case that, and it was just before the virus, but it works for the virus as well, that now we're facing new forms of risks that are a call for rethink the entire system. What are we talking about? We are talking about risks that are certain, climate change or the virus, risks that are conveying a lot of non-linearities and that are interacting with each other. And it's extremely important because it means that it's very complicated to build models to predict the future when you have non-linearities, major forces interacting with each other. And third, we said 18 months ago that these risks are threatening lives, threatening humanity. Climate change is an existential threat. And when you have the three characteristics, the three features, it's a total, it's a request, it's a call for rethink the entire system. And what does it mean? It means, at least if we keep the big picture before entering into detail, it means that we have to shift from efficiency that has been the search for corporates and governments for decades towards resiliency. And basically that's one of the key messages of Radical Uncertainty by Mervyn King and John Kay, recently published as well. And if you pay attention to what Mark Carney says in his book, Values, it's even one step further. He says that we have explored for decades and more the attitude of getting a price to get things solved. And he says, maybe it's not the right attitude, and we should rethink the fact that by getting a price on everything, actually we are deteriorating the relationship that we have within society. And he gives the famous example delivered by Michael Sandel, the philosopher at Harvard, with the fact that when you give a price to items like being late, for parents to get their kids back, actually the parents are getting more and more late and not the other way around. And so by getting a price on things, actually you deteriorate the social links that people have all together. So to summarize, yes, we need to rethink the way we are managing our societies because we are facing new forms of risks that are unhedgeable, that cannot be solved with a silver bullet like a carbon tax, that requires that all the different players must be part of the solution, and even more profoundly, that a selfish approach by the individuals is not the right attitude. Did I answer your first?
That's fine, exactly. So let's, as you were saying, think now a little bit moving forward in terms of the key levers for change. What we heard at the start from Tommaso around legislation and regulation and the important role it should play, and indeed about civil society. Let's think a bit systematically then more about some tangible proposals to evolve the system with all its failings that we've been hearing about to date. Tommaso, if you had 2 or 3 key things that we need to focus on, what would they be? The drivers for change?
Sure. So first, Andrew, I just wanted to continue something you asked earlier to Marisa. He said, but isn't the COVID research for the coronavirus an example of this extraordinary success of capitalism? I mean, I'm surprised that, of course, you wanted to provoke her, but this is precisely an instance where a lot of public money was pumped. So this is not the quintessential capitalism. There were the UK put in money, the US put in money, Germany put in money, the European Union put in money. They also devised some contracts, advanced market commitment that you typically don't have. And we actually produce something which is probably good for the UK and for the US, but for 2/3 of the world is still a disaster. So be cautious. This is not an example of capitalism. It's really a combination, perhaps a good combination of good capitalism with good market intervention by government. But I wouldn't characterize it at all as the unregulated capitalism at work, because we had a lot of government intervention, contrary to many other instances. Solutions. My angle. I'm a competition economist. I was the chief economist of the European Commission for competition, and I think something that we have lost is this idea of resilience. That to me means having multiple firms. So we have a more resilient economy if we have alternative suppliers. If we have 20 chemical firms doing parallel research over a disease, you can be reassured that they will be faster at innovating in a market. Instead, we are in a situation now where we are dependent. We've seen it through the pandemic. We have one search engine in the digital space. Since we are always online, we have 2 or 3 cloud at most providers of the infrastructure in the cloud, and you name it. So we have cornered ourselves very dangerously in the hands of a few big corporations, which are unaccounted, unelected, extremely profitable. They go beyond the size of any government. They're worth trillions of dollars in market capitalization. And we have put ourselves in this corner. So one solution for me would be to revamp competition, to give a chance to smaller entrepreneurs, to smaller firms with different business models too. And you could do that only if you enforce the existing laws, but you have to change also the existing laws. We are allowing corporations basically to gobble up any competitors. Sticking to the digital example, we had 1,000 digital acquisitions and 0 of those have ever been prohibited. So these numbers are massive. So only a big change. And the big change, I have to say, unfortunately, Europe was at the forefront until recently, and now Europe is lagging. There is a new air coming once again from the United States. The United States, with the change in the Biden administration, they've signaled really that they want to move very fast. So I hope Europe and the UK will also take this as a challenge to move up together and raise the stakes as the United States are doing. My solution for now would be reignite competition in the economy that we have lost, especially in some very key sectors. And this is health, this is pharma, this is digital, this is transport, this is telecommunications. And there are some key areas that have become extremely concentrated. So I would call for revamping existing competition rules, enforcing those rules, and also making sure the regulators are empowered to make sure that, again, the good aspects of markets, which is diversity, innovation, ideas, which are coming back and benefit society as a whole.
Okay, so Marissa, we've heard from Tommaso around relivening competition, although of course in a sense that's almost a return to a more efficient Friedmanite vision, I suppose, in some ways, isn't it? I mean, what would you see as the key drivers of change? And let's think about, not simply business itself, but policy, the broader structures within which business operates.
So, I mean, I'll go back to what was said before. That is really policies, regulations, and incentives. So, going back to the question of the vaccines that Tommaso quite rightly said, there was a lot of public investment into the development of those vaccines. That's not an isolated example. We know, governments. Public money flows into private R&D in the healthcare sector, and there's a lot of funding going into private R&D. Then we have an incentive, intellectual property by which, when those treatments are developed and come to the market, the taxpayer then pays again an exorbitant price with the prices protected under the patent system. So the taxpayers pay twice, and then so it's not only about how much money went into these vaccines with advanced market commitments, but this is the standard really of the R&D engine in the healthcare sector. And then there's actually no conditionalities on those profits made. The governments don't say, this money really needs to be invested in these key areas of need to promote global well-being. That doesn't exist. So that money ends up being distributed to shareholders, and I think this really, stimulates that wrong logic about markets and the role of markets in healthcare. So what we really want, to go back to your question, we really need stronger stewardship from governments in establishing and enforcing the desired returns for public investment in innovation. We will need to rethink the patent system. I mean, this is always a taboo, but the patent system is not conducive of better health. There are other incentive mechanisms that have been devised and need to be tested and evaluated, that they may be a bit more conducive of health and well-being. And we really need to strengthen the role of the public sector as an innovator rather than being just a passive funder. There's a lot of good competencies in the public sector, in non-private research centers, and those really need to be invested on in collaboration with the private sector. Required a track record in effectively delivering innovation. And something that hasn't been really discussed today is we need global coordination. This is really essential in the context of healthcare. We can't have countries really thinking on their own populations. They need to, or organizations thinking about a specific narrow disease. There really needs to be concerted action across all countries, across all organizations, not only in the funding of, for example, innovation for healthcare, of better treatments, the resource allocation, the establishment of key priorities of need, and then granting access to those innovations. This needs to be systematic. We shouldn't need a pandemic like this one for these things to start to happen.
Okay. So so just a reminder, I see there's a few questions here on, or remarks on, comments from viewers on YouTube, one focusing on the issue of low wages and the challenge, therefore, of inequality and distribution of wealth. And another one about, we're talking a lot about global system change from the outside, but what about changing the attitude of people from the inside? And then the question broadly of democracy and empowerment. So a few other themes there, but Frederick, what's your take? What do you see from a perspective, particularly of business, about the levers that need to be put in place in order to enable this transition to a newer form of capitalism?
I think, Andrew, that it's a fantastic call for financial innovation. I think we won the battle one. The battle one was the discussion that we have about the need to rethink the system and so on. The question is now shifting towards how, and so that's your second round of questions. And here I would like to put on the table 3 dimensions about measuring externalities, about the capital structure of corporates, and how to get employees benefiting from the wealth creation. So a few words about each of them. Measuring externalities, we have tons of money being managed by public pension funds, by central banks, by sovereign wealth funds, and so on. Does it make sense that all these public investors are investing into corporates that have negative externalities? Not really. Does it make sense to have the retail networks, meaning individuals, investing into corporates having a negative impact on society? No. So we should develop not only the ESG approach of corporates, how corporates are managed over the long run in a sustainable way, but about their activities and the positive or negative externalities. And here the academic world can help. There are here and there some initiatives, but much more needs to be done. Second point is about the structure of capital of corporates. More and more corporates are requesting the help of governments when they face a problem. We saw it during the 2007 and 8 crisis, we saw it recently, and so on. No, we should think about ways to structure the capital of corporates that can absorb shocks. We have done it with banks. It was required in different countries that banks have structures of capital that can absorb a sudden external shock, contingent capital. We could think about something very similar to all sectors that are exposed to climate change and so on and so on. So what I'm trying to say here is that the private sector is now using the safety nets being provided by governments on a large scale. And it's not very good for society, because then the resources for education, health, and so on are getting limited for governments. Similarly, corporates have shorter and shorter investors with shorter and shorter investment horizons. And so they cannot navigate through the transition towards a low carbon economy. We should think about financial innovation that solve the problem. So at a very granular level, we need to rethink how corporates are equipped in terms of capital structure to navigate this world of uncertainty. And third, we all know that the wealth creation has been captured by the shareholders over the recent decades. And the workers did not benefit from it. Here as well, it's a call for financial innovation. How can we get workers aligned with the share value increase? There are some technologies available here and there around the planet, and the policymakers should pay attention to it and to promote it, while recognizing that the workers are already exposed to the risk of their corporates, to their contracts, but to have a mechanism where they could buy some shares of their corporates, get a protection, and get a leverage in case of share price increase is a fantastic way to realign the interests of CEOs, shareholders, and workers. And that's a way to reduce inequalities. So what I'm trying to say here is that very often we think in terms of, and it's good, in terms of what is the big picture, how the policymakers can solve the problem, and we should as well add to the picture how financial innovation can help or can be part of the solution with tackling very concrete challenges like how do we measure externalities, what kind of capital structure when we are entering a world of uncertainties, how to get the employees benefit from the share price increase.
Okay, Frederick, thanks very much. We're really almost out of time, but I just wanted to highlight a couple of comments or suggestions also from the audiences. So greater global coordination, the role potentially for universal basic income and indeed living wages, reduction of tax evasion as key drivers, and ways to develop and measure positive externalities as well. Just literally, if you, Frederick touched a little bit briefly on the role of academia. I don't know whether literally in one sentence, either Marissa or Tommaso wants to come back as well on the specific role that academics could play. Literally one sentence, please. Marissa?
I mean, academics can play an important role in evidence-based solutions and co-designing of those solutions, either with business or policymakers. And I think, today, particularly Leonardo is really well placed to do that, not only because of the leadership and the strategic skills that the researchers in the center have, but because it sits within Imperial College, that is a University of Science and Technology. So, we do collaborate across all these different areas that require to make such systemic change, and I think they are really well positioned.
Thanks so much. And Tommaso, a final word on
my side,
academia, and perhaps the.
I would say just one thing. So The Leonardo Center is already sitting on amazing data. They have an incredible data set that they have already assembled, and that they started analyzing it. And they're also very pragmatic. I know many of the researchers. And the challenge for academia is also to produce results in finite time. We want to be impactful. We don't have forever until we have the results which are so clean. And I'm sure that exactly a year from now, that's the challenge. Researcher and colleagues from the Leonardo Center will be presenting very exciting results from the research that they will be doing next year. That's my wish.
Okay, Tommaso, thank you very much. Marissa and Frederick as well for a great panel. Apologies we couldn't bring in all of your thoughts or those of the attendees, but some really great and thought-provoking ideas. And join us again very shortly for our second challenge, that of the business transition. Welcome back to our challenge session today. And we're going to talk about the Business Transition Challenge next, with some introductory remarks, first of all, from Paul Hudson, the Chief Executive Officer of Sanofi. Paul.
Good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to join the public launch of the Leonardo Lab on Business for Society at the Imperial College of London. I'm truly sorry that I'm not able to join you all there live today, and so instead I'll simply do the next best thing and share some thoughts with you via this video. Thank you to Lise Kingo, Chair of the Advisory Board of the Leonardo Center, and Maurizio Zolo, Scientific Director of the Center, for giving me this opportunity to do so. Bringing business, policymakers, and academia together to collaborate and propose new forms of enterprise for a better and more sustainable world is clearly a noble ambition, and one that arrives at a very timely moment. Over the last year, we all indeed have witnessed the impressive power of collaboration. Since the onset of the pandemic, public authorities, scientists, academia, and industry have worked closely together to discover and produce vaccines at a pace that has defied historical precedent. Every stakeholder has brought its own skills to help solve a problem that no one could have tackled alone. And as we look to the future with hope and optimism, we must ensure that we don't forget the lessons we have learned in this crisis and how they will inform our future behaviors as a global society. From my perspective, it starts with accepting that all of us are works in progress in many ways, and in order to shape a better future, we often need to reset some of our old beliefs. We have to unlearn and relearn. When I joined Sanofi in September 2019, a few months before the pandemic, I spent a lot of time talking with and listening to colleagues around the world. Everywhere I went, I had someone asking me about our company's purpose, how we would reduce our environmental footprint, or our plan to foster a more diverse and inclusive workplace. Those questions ranked at the same level as those about our ambition to discover breakthrough medicines for patients. I was not totally surprised, but it was a clear signal that expectations on our societal impact as a company were growing, and that raising our game on these issues would be an important priority for me in 2020, in addition to executing our strategic roadmap. Just a few months later, well, the pandemic upended all of us and our work as a company. Our work was stripped down to the bare essentials, producing and supplying essential medicines, and finding ways to keep advancing science for patients. As dramatic and challenging as those moments were, they gave me the opportunity to see real time the strength of a purpose-driven organization striving to do the right thing. We also quickly saw the crisis exacerbate existing inequalities and inequities. The social pandemic of racism and growing discrimination was revealed in ways that many of us couldn't see before. It's in this unique context that we revamped our corporate social responsibility strategy, or what we also call our renewed commitments to society. As we undertook this review, we asked ourselves three fundamental questions. How can we have the greatest impact? Where are we uniquely positioned to make a difference that can be scaled and sustained over time? How can we embed our commitments into our long-term business strategy? Today, the ambitions of our new strategy have been fully aligned to and embedded in our long-term strategy. Of course, as a company that works every day to improve people's lives around the world, an important part of our contribution is directly related to the medicines and vaccines we provide to patients and populations. That's why we decided to create a non-profit, sustainable business unit to increase the number of patients we can reach with our products. Sanofi Global Health will operate in 40 of the world's poorest countries and improve access to 30 of our most essential medicines across various therapeutic areas, including cardiovascular, diabetes, tuberculosis, malaria, and cancer. We will also accelerate our efforts to eradicate polio and eliminate sleeping sickness, while making a bold commitment to develop medicines for the most difficult to treat cancers in children. Obviously, we are also mindful of our obligation to do all we can to ensure a healthy planet. We are moving forward with initiatives to help improve the environmental footprint of our products. For, by example, removing plastic in blister packs for all our vaccines. And we will continue to strengthen our efforts to reduce the environmental and carbon impact of our operations. Last but definitely not least, our new strategy will push us further to build a workforce that fully reflects the society we live in and the patients we serve, and increase diversity in clinical trials and in our supplier pool. As you can see, all of those flagship initiatives are spread across the company's value chain, from R&D to manufacturing to commercial operations. Every part of the organization has a role to play and a contribution to bring. We have a lot to do and important challenges ahead of us, but we know we can do more as a company to help tackle some of the toughest 21st century challenges. And as we execute this strategy, we will need platforms such as the Leonardo Center to think about how to be bold and bring new ideas, how to create new platforms for exchange for all stakeholders, and hold businesses accountable for their efforts. I look forward to joining you in London for a future event, and meanwhile, I wish you a very successful event and a launch, and thank you again for inviting me today.
Thanks very much, Paul. So welcome back for our second challenge session on the business transition over the next 15 minutes or so. And do please, those watching, post any questions and reflections also on the chat function on YouTube. So we've got Nile Shah from Imperial, Elena Bonfiglioni, who's Managing Director of Healthcare and Life Sciences at Microsoft, and Ed Daniels, EVP Strategy Portfolio at Shell. So let's start with you, Nile. We've been talking about this sort of the challenge, potentially the crisis of capitalism. So what should the new rules of the game be, do you think, for companies under which to operate?
Well, I think the most important is to have a better understanding of their wider impacts across their value chain. So a much clearer understanding on, upstream and downstream of the particular enterprise. What impacts are they having on resources, on climate change, on people and skills, and to develop sophisticated measurement systems that are transparent. So what's really interesting is a lot of companies, of course, are now voluntarily starting to report across a wide range of performance measures. Standardization of that and ways of making fair comparisons between companies and between whole value chains, so that ultimately people who make big decisions about procurement, whether that's you and I as individuals or indeed other large corporations with their own aspirations, and perhaps most importantly governments, can really start to drive the right kind of behavior across these not only enterprises but value chains.
Would you agree? What are the new rules of the game, and how to interact between business, regulators, and others in society more effectively?
Again, I think it's very difficult.
I was going to Elena. Sorry, Neil. I was going to Elena on this. Yeah, Elena.
Yes, thank you, Andrew. And I really think that as we think about the new role of business for society, which is really a transformative, powerful word, is for society, not only in society. Well, really, technology, data, and the opportunity to really create resilience and innovation through reasoning over digital data and bringing in new capabilities is what will spring us forward. So we have to make sure that if we see technology as an enabler for the future governance, for the future business, for the future innovation and societal impact we wanna create, then we need to make sure that technology benefits everyone and the planet itself. We have been witnessing transition and resilience that was built from the data and the digital backbone of society and of business from the ground up. And that, Andrew, has been at the level of macro decision making, but also at the level of biology and really the molecular level, as we've been rethinking about what type of innovation we needed for the medicine of the future.
And given you're from a tech company, just a word on that, Elena, because obviously for a long time tech was seen as incredibly powerful and enabling. There's a bit of a backlash at the moment, isn't there, both about their monopolistic power, about the concerns of use of data, and indeed about the often somewhat hidden but huge carbon footprint. So do you think there's a particular role of the tech sector to come forward with new approaches?
Here is how I look at it. There is an opportunity and a responsibility that goes with it. There is an opportunity to extract utility from data following the North Star of data dignity, which is very different than looking at extracting value from data for commercial or marketing purposes. At Microsoft, we think about privacy in the digital space as a human right. And we are seeking how to support reasoning over data to save lives, for example, in the field that is really my own in healthcare. The cure of cancer sits in data, and only our ability to shape governance mechanisms that are hinging upon privacy, security, transparency, inclusion, only our ability to do that in partnership with stakeholders will make sure that we can use the power of data to do better in the world. That's the way we're looking at this.
So Ed, we've talked about tech and its role and some of the new pressures and criticism. Of course, the fossil fuel sector traditionally and energy companies have been in the front line for this for a long time. What grounds perhaps could you give us for optimism about a new paradigm being taken by the energy sector and indeed Shell?
So I think, we've got to be really clear in the energy system about the purpose that we've got. Energy is a fundamental building block of all societies. And the purpose that we've laid out in Shell and many of our competitors laid out is to be part of the decarbonization of the energy system, part of the transition of the energy system to one that is low carbon, no carbon over the coming decades, recognizing that we have to carry all of our stakeholders with us, that whole gamut of stakeholders through the whole ESG lens that we've got. So clarity of purpose and ESG. The one thing I would just build and add to the previous conversation is data is going to be really important to show what progress is being made, to show what companies are doing well and not so well. And there is a huge trust element here. And I think a role of an institution like Imperial College, like the Leonardo Center, I think is fundamental in bringing data that people can trust, because there's an element of the Wild West out there of multiple data sources, not all of which I think are entirely trustworthy.
Yes, as we've seen with the huge multiplicity of filters for ESG investment, for example. I mean, just give us a sense of what other game changers you see, Ed, on the horizon that could be transformational in a positive sense in the next few years that business
So actually, you know, the energy transition is something that I think we need to be really excited about. It's an opportunity for huge developments in terms of technology. If you look at the technology developments in the energy system itself, but using digital to harness the ability to transform industries, whether it's transport industries or other industries, there's huge transformations possible. I think new business models can be developed that we're just not present today as we rebuild in the next few decades an entire energy system for the world. The current one took us 100 years to get there. We've got to do it in 30. So huge amount of investment, a huge amount of opportunity. And you know, for me, I think this is a great opportunity to invent those new business models, to harness new technology and find ourselves in 2050 and beyond in a world of net zero, but plentiful energy that can harness growth in the world and solve multiplicity of other problems that is beset at the moment.
And Elena, picking up on Ed's point there about data, but also really much throwing this forward to the role of the Leonardo Center and academic institutions, what more help could they provide? What would be your challenge to them?
Yes, first of all, let me say there is, just picking up on what has just been said, the commitment that Microsoft has made to be carbon negative, to be water positive, zero waste, and protect more land than we use by 2030 is no little commitment. And therefore, we really need these type of platforms of thought leadership like Leonardo is bringing together, where we can learn, relearn, and learn with others. We can understand the role that we have as enabling for sustainability innovation, but also what we can learn ourselves to go faster in that commitment, even if it is already a bold one. So I see coming together, co-innovating on data. Data collaborative has been really accelerating over the last 2 years. And we've seen it in healthcare, but we've seen it also in the field of sustainability. Really, how do we create that global view from a sustainability data point perspective to preserve biodiversity or to help many companies, large and small, do their carbon negative journey all together? That's what I hope Leonardo can really bring us to do in a co-innovation fashion.
And Nile, unfortunately, we're going to have to stop in just a minute, but of course, chemical engineering, very active and applied. There's a critique sometimes even of business schools, though, that they're a little bit too inwards looking. They aren't actually necessarily quite as outwards engaged in terms of sort of impact as they should be. Again, so a challenge for you, from you to academia, and something that the Leonardo management should be thinking about as they really try to help push the agenda in the most constructive way.
Yeah, I think first of all, we need to start to think about interventions that actually work and doing some, practical experiments with different organizations and exploring what we learn and sharing that. So I think, as Ed has pointed out, the timescale is really short for this massive challenge we have just around the energy system transition, let alone many other industrial and manufacturing systems. So I think the role of academia is really to understand across different enterprises and across different geographies, what are some fantastic examples of what actually works, how to develop new technologies and implement them at scale, and to measure and understand from organizational change and organizational interventions, which of course is where things like business schools and the Leonardo Center come in. What can we learn and how quickly can we get those to propagate across these massive organizations that we've have represented today, like Microsoft, and then through their value chains, and then through that next base of middle size and smaller size enterprises. So I think there's huge opportunities for both engineering, which is my discipline, and business, to share that knowledge and to have impact and to do that very quickly.
So thanks very much indeed, panelists. I'm afraid we're going to have to shift on now, but Nile, Elena and Ed, great contributions, very helpful. And just one comment from the attendees about the scope of the SDGs and how much more should they be used as part of changing strategic planning. So thinking of mapping in societal priorities more directly. Anyway, thanks very much to our panelists for a great second challenge. And now let me turn to Lord Callanan, the Minister for Climate Change and Corporate Responsibility at the UK government, for some remarks. Lord Callanan.
Well, thank you very much indeed, and it's a great pleasure to join you at the Leonardo Center today. Thank you for the invitation to speak to you this afternoon. The long-term stability of the global economy, society's overall well-being, does depend on effective action to address climate change. And the dominant business practices that have emerged in most societies have, I think, undoubtedly contributed to both the planetary and the social imbalances that we find today. We all know the effects. This has caused great consequences for all forms of life on the planet. But business and a thriving economy can also, of course, be a great force for change. We have to ensure that we build back better from the tremendous dislocation caused by the pandemic. We need to respond to the global climate crisis by ensuring that business can profit through solving and healing the environmental crisis. So I very much welcome the Leonardo Center's initiative to partner with businesses to identify business models that match together with these challenges, because it's the systemic change that we will need to see requires the collaborative efforts of both corporations, of public institutions, of investors, and academia. You will have seen that the government is leading on this. We have an ambitious UK net zero target. We have the Prime Minister's 10-point plan for a green industrial revolution. So in this context, we recognise the importance of innovation, the importance of being on the right side of progress in how to grow businesses. Government, of course, has a crucial role to signal change across the economy by driving up accountability that surrounds that sustainability. As a priority, we want our businesses to become more resilient, become more sustainable in the face of the environmental challenges that we all face. So we need to encourage private sector finance to direct greater funds to a sustainable future for us all. Global standards for sustainability that transcend borders can provide transparency, they can provide comparability for business activities, and set an international baseline for both disclosures and for decision making. So the government very much welcomes the decision of the IFRS Foundation to establish a sustainability standards board, the SSBs, if we haven't got enough acronyms. This will produce global standards for sustainability, which standard by standard will provide a framework for reporting on the full range of environmental, social, and governance matters. We've already seen how the Foundation's international financial reporting standards facilitate international investment with high quality and comparable accounting standards. So it's in all of our interests for international sustainability standards to gain similar recognition to help to direct capital towards sustainability and towards climate innovation. So I'm particularly pleased that as we approach COP26, the first standard to be issued is climate related. Many large companies, many large groups already, of course, report on environmental, social, and employee matters, as well as the respect for human rights. And I'm pleased to see that many UK companies already provide high-quality reporting in this area. Companies are right to expect reporting to be consistent, to be streamlined, and my department, Bain, will work with stakeholders to develop an effective framework for the adoption of those international sustainability standards. So later this year, we will consult on the framework, and we will, of course, as always, welcome the engagement of institutions such as the Leonardo Center. The international sustainability standards will also provide an opportunity to harmonise wider sustainability disclosures by UK corporates. In November last year, the Chancellor announced that the UK would develop a green taxonomy to require companies to report on the greenness of their business activities. And the UK is keen to lead the way with these activities to help to show our global ambition. Of course, as we've seen with accounting standards, investors will need comparable, robust data to make those effective investment decisions. So it's certainly my hope that the international sustainability standards will provide a global framework for capital markets that will help to drive that green investment. Let me conclude by saying a few words about the Financial Stability Board's Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, the TCFD, as we all know it. It established a global standard to guide climate-related disclosures across economies. This included developing recommendations on how entities from across the whole economy can assess and can then disclose their climate risk. The UK government was one of the first to endorse the TCFD's recommendations. We did that in the 2019 Green Finance Strategy. We set an expectation that all listed issuers, all large asset owners, would be disclosing in line with the TCFD's recommendations by 2022. And we aim to be among the first countries in the world to make TCFD-aligned disclosures mandatory across the economy. And so last November, the Chancellor set out the government's ambition to do this no later than 2025, and we've already published a roadmap to help to deliver this. So the government is ambitious on this front. We recently conducted a public consultation on the proposals to implement and to require TCFD-aligned disclosures from UK public and large private businesses. We canvassed views on the location of climate disclosures in company reports and on the depth and the detail of the new reporting requirements. So subject to successful introduction of the legislation, the requirements will come into force next year. The consultation attracted nearly 150 responses from a range of stakeholders. We're currently analysing what they all said, and we will then proceed accordingly. But I'm very impressed at the quality of the discussion that we've had at today's event. So we need to adapt systems, both within companies and economy-wide. We need to encourage business leaders to embed climate risk in their governance and their strategies. We want to make the transition to managing these issues as business as usual. If we can do all of these things, then we will leave the environment and our economy, of course, in a better state for future generations, and we'll be able to succeed in building back a better, more sustainable future for the world. So let me finally thank the Leonardo Center for giving me the opportunity today to set out the government's ambitions in this area, and I very much look forward to discussing our ambitions programme of corporate reporting reforms in the months to come. Thank you very much indeed.
So many thanks to the Minister, and a reminder, of course, it's a pivotal moment for the UK, an opportunity, but also a challenge in terms of using its leadership of the G7, co-chairmanship of the Global Partnership for Education, and of course its chairmanship of the COP Climate Change Conference at the end of this year to push for reforms, including perhaps a return to increased support for international aid. Thanks indeed for that. And now join us again very shortly for our final challenge, the Leadership Challenge. So welcome back to the last of our three challenges, the leadership challenge. And what are the leadership values that will drive the transition? We've got a great panel discussion, but first of all, I'd like to hand over to Clark Murphy, the Chief Executive of Russell Reynolds Associates, for some introductory remarks.
Hello, everyone. It's a privilege to participate today at the launch event of the Leonardo Center. I guess we all know it couldn't have come at a better time. The world needs more public-private partnerships. The world needs more sustainable leaders, and we need this coalition that you all are launching to identify and develop those leaders. At Russell Reynolds Associates, every year we recruit thousands of leaders into board roles, into C-suite roles. And these leaders not only impact their own organizations, but the world in which they live. In today's environment, more so in the last few years than ever before, I think the recognition of sustainability and sustainable leaders is critical. Ironically and sadly, it hasn't been a real factor in deciding who has been appointed to leadership teams in the past. Just to give you a point of reference, in 2018, we analyzed 4,000 executive specifications where we participated in recruiting those people, and only 4% of them, 4%, was sustainability experience or mindset an actual requirement for the job. In that same year, I sat in a room, a little cubby hole with Lisa Kingo off the main drag in Davos, and we went round and round as they were thinking ahead for the 20th anniversary of the SDGs. Why was there not more progress? There was discussion and resolutions and whiteboards, etc. And it was very frustrating. And it finally dawned on us it was coming down to a lack of leadership. Leaders to lead from the front, to not only make progress on sustainability, to make progress on developing sustainable leaders. So we joined forces, Russell Reynolds and UN Global Compact, to set out to think about answering one question: how do we make sustainability core to the DNA of leadership teams? How do we identify that DNA and then empower the more successful leaders to develop others? That's the leadership challenge. So we identified 55 what we call sustainable pioneers, chief executive officers or board members or chairs across industries and geographies around the world who were leaders in sustainability and in corporate performance with sustainable operations. The bar was high. It was not enough that they advocated for sustainability. We looked for leaders that innovated and pushed change, that made things actually happen. And we identified the differentiating characteristics of those 55 pioneers for what set them apart. So, what is it that makes a leader a sustainable leader? And there are two key attributes: a sustainable mindset combined with a sustainable skill set. Sustainable mindset and skill set. The sustainable mindset is the purpose-driven belief that you all have that business is not a commercial activity divorced from the wider societal environmental context in which it operates. And mindset's crucial, important, but it's not enough. Sustainable leaders, we have discovered through this work, bring a unique set of four skills to their work. First, multi-level systems thinking, which I'll explain, stakeholder inclusion, disruptive innovation, and long-term activation. So first, multi-level systems thinking. It's a mouthful. Sustainable leaders go beyond a deep understanding of their own organizations to incorporate into the larger economic, societal, environmental systems around them. They're integrating their operations into a much more complex world around them successfully. They drive actions that turn sustainability into a competitive advantage, not just an initiative. Second, stakeholder inclusion. Ironic, given the discussion in the last year or so about stakeholders and shareholders. Sustainable leaders do not manage stakeholders, they include them. They understand a diverse range of points of view that drive value creation with all their stakeholders, and they bring them along together. They understand the different stakeholders, they include them, they bring them along. Third, disruptive innovation. Transformation's easy to discuss, but it's incredibly difficult to deliver. Sustainable leaders are willing to disrupt their business and industry, and they ask, why can it not be done differently? They make the bold investments that eliminate the trade-off between profitability and sustainability. And fourth, long-term activation. Just to that last point about profitability and sustainability, they don't simply have a long-term orientation. They set audacious goals and drive concerted action to surpass them. They stay the course to have that profitability with sustainability. And they may make decisions that are unpopular with short-term oriented stakeholders. Quarter to quarter does not create a sustainable leader. So this model of this framework of the sustainable leader provides a blueprint for organizations to select and develop the sustainable leaders of tomorrow. But we've got to have the commitment of the board members and the commitment of the chief executives to do that. And if nothing else, ExxonMobil and the pressure from institutional investors on boards has come to the fore in the last few weeks. But interestingly, our research tells us there are more sustainable leaders in waiting than you might think, which is the good news. We believe this is key. It's not just that the chief executives of the boards will make progress, create environments to identify and develop sustainable leaders. We think there's a radical rethink of the role of boards, which I think has begun rapidly recently, and C-suite leaders to drive the sustainable change and close the gap between talk and action. By the way, you'll be happy to know that in the last year, that 4% from 2018 grew to 30% in 2020. So it's happening. It is happening. 30% of the roles now reference sustainability as part of the responsibilities or candidate requirements of those we have recruited. It shows that these partnerships can work. It shows awareness is growing. In my mind, institutional investors are creating the push from the top and employees are creating the push from the bottom. So the boards and the C-suite need your help. And the things you're thinking about is a leadership challenge for the Leonardo Center to create a faster pace of change. We think the leadership challenge will be the most powerful lever for the decade of action. So with that, we look forward to this discussion and your time and comparing notes. Thanks very much.
Thanks very much, Clark, for some good provocative kickoff remarks about the key traits required for next generation leadership. So we've now, over the next 20 minutes or so, got a great panel with four excellent participants: Mark Kennedy from Imperial, Andrew Kahn from WWF, Huawei and Nomura, Suchita Govil from Covestro, and Keith Tuffley from Citi. And a reminder to those watching, do please post any remarks, reflections and questions in the chat function on YouTube where you're watching. And a couple of remarks I see already, one about the importance of diversity, including those debating and participating in these initiatives, both in terms of gender and also in terms of those from other underrepresented groups, ethnic, socio-economic groups, and indeed different parts of the world, ever more inclusive to try to reflect truly the diversity of the world and those that we need to engage as part of the challenge. But let me turn to you first, Mark Kennedy. Would you agree? What do you see as the key, both the key traits that are required for leadership, and what the blockers are, perhaps, to those rising to the top at the moment?
With the remarks we just heard, it's an excellent summary of the way that people are changing how they're thinking about leadership. And I would say, in terms of blockers, because I don't have much to add to those wise comments, that the history of business is a checkered one when it comes to stepping out into the controversies that that really are at the heart of this. Do we need a new concept of business? I mean, business, as Tommaso was saying earlier, has kind of a history of doing a cat and mouse game with regulators, stakeholders of different kinds. And what we really need is people who are willing to take heat over their positions. And I think there's a simple way of thinking about this. That we need kind of a new par for the course. So I have three words that make up that simple word. Participants. Who are the proper participants? We can't have business saying, leave us alone, and oh my gosh, we're too big to fail and we're about to, so we need help. you can't have your cake and eat it too. So who are the participants? And I think the idea that, government and institutions that undergird markets and create the playing field should stay entirely out of the game. It makes about as much sense as having European Championship football without referees. It just doesn't work. Yeah, it doesn't mean you want the referees to be the stars of the show, but they have to be at the game, and the game doesn't work without them. So I think participants, who are the participants? And I would say that's one place where engaging the ref in a more constructive and grown-up way is needed. Accountabilities, we already heard the theme that it's not just about your shareholder and profits, but it's a wider set of accountability. So I won't elaborate on that. And then the last bit is the rules. We have a history of people saying, there should be no rules because competition will handle it all. But if the competition's breaking down, then we need rules that make it robust. And again, we're back to the ref. So I would say participants, accountabilities, rules, stepping into the fray to sort of take on these issues that generate heat and do things that maybe slightly stray from the pack. We've seen some of that in the past year. More of it would be great. And that's a type of leadership that I think will make a difference.
Andrew Carney, you've got deep experience of management and non-executive director roles. You engage a lot with business, of course, as well as the non-profit sector. What's your view? What are those key leadership traits that we need, and where are the blockages to seeing those come forward and being enabled?
Well, I think things have changed remarkably since I started my professional life 50 years ago. Then we had, if you like, the Jack Welch approach to management. I am a tough, strong leader. You will follow me. You'll do what I tell you, and if you don't deliver, I'll sack you. It was not always like that, but there was, that was seen to be back in 1970 this sort of ideal, and we'd moved a long way from that. What I would say is that the leadership remains absolutely key. In my experience, organization, you can tell within almost minutes of coming into an organization, certainly within days, whether you have a strong leader, not a dominant leader, but an inspirational leader, a team building leader. I found this when I was a senior member of the British Foreign Office. I went around about 70 embassies around the world in my time there, and you could within a matter of hours know whether the ambassador was a good leader or a bad leader. The same goes for schools. I'm now chair of a university, and the same goes for universities too. So I think in the contemporary world, we need leaders who have that inspirational quality, have the leadership, the ability to inspire people and give clear guidance, who are team builders, team creators, not dominant people. And you still have the problem that much of the measurement of leadership encourages dominance and encourages and is somewhat arbitrary, rather than genuinely measuring creation of teams, creation of long-term benefits and long-term profitability. So I think the first big blockage and challenge is the way we measure businesses, particularly the way the stock market measures businesses. Another, of course, is the way that the public media measure businesses. We have moved into something of a celebrity world now, and so you have celebrity leaders, and we, all of us, I think, are susceptible to the idea, if I've appeared on a major news program, if I've published an article in a major newspaper, if people, when I go into a drinks party, flock me because they recognize my face, I'm a good leader. And I think we need to find ways to get beyond that. The last point I'd make is this. I believe now we have a new requirement for leadership, one which has not been there in the past, but is now. If we are to confront the challenges facing the world, and earlier panels have been dealing with those, notably climate change, notably the loss of nature, notably inequality, we do need leaders who can persuade people, both their own employees, but the broader society and the political world, We need leaders who can persuade them to act against our evolutionary instincts, against our nature. Our nature is to take things from the natural world, to control the natural world, and if you like, to exploit it. And indeed, we need to defer our gratification and our profit in ways to confront climate change and to confront the loss of biodiversity. So I think that's going to require a different sort of leadership from the past.
Thanks. Very powerful remarks about the idea of being able to identify a well-led organization within minutes or hours, and the dangers of celebrity leadership, as it were. So Cheta, does that resonate with you? How does Covestro go about trying to measure and foster the development of the right sort of leadership?
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think some really interesting remarks have been made, and I tend to agree with most of them. I would start off by just saying that leadership is, of course, about the person and the leader, but to a large extent, it's about the followership as well. And leaders who cannot walk in the follower's shoes and pull back the future and figure out what impact is created, not by themselves, but also by their followership, I think would do a disfavor to the system. And I have to say, organizations, I'll come back to the point on Covestro, I think organizations need to realize the power they have in creating impact way into the future, way into the next generations, whether it's for own profit impact, but also, and much more importantly, environmental, community, societal, and planetary impact. And to that extent, back to Covestro, we are very conscious of the whole leadership and followership issue. We do have a great focus on inclusive leadership, which raises both the ceiling and the floor, because you can't do one without the other. We are very conscious about enterprise leadership and T-shaped leaders who are able to operate within an ecosystem and not just take a simple financial profit logic, but go into the triple P logic. We have it in our incentive systems. We've launched a new vision on the desire to be fully circular, and part of our recruitment traits as well focus, yes, on functional skills, but a skill base which also allows a diverse workforce to not just manage themselves day in and day out, but to lead the path. Because I do think as an organization, it's not just the portfolio you put out. It's not just the words and speeches that we put out. We talked a little bit about the celebrity leadership style. I think it is much more important to focus on the impact created today, tomorrow, and many years from now on future generations, and what the followership will be able to do with that impact.
Thanks, Sujita. Powerful concept there of followership alongside leadership. So Keith, the banking sector, of course, perhaps historically is often thought of as rather male-dominated, red-blooded, macho, arguably at the forefront of profit maximization. How is Citi and your reflections more generally evolving in terms of the leadership for the more sustainable, socially oriented capitalism of the future that we've been discussing?
Well, look, one of the good things about the banking sector is you're actually very much in the center of all these flows. Being in a global business in all virtually all countries in the world and dealing with companies in all sectors across the full value chain. Money and the banking sector is actually at the heart of this, and therefore it plays a very important role in facilitating and accelerating change. And to the point about leadership, this is where it is so important for the banking sector to show the leadership that is so much needed now. I mean, I'd like to answer that with highlighting three key aspects, I think, where we are in history at the moment. We are at a unique time in human history. I mean, there's no doubt about that. And the three things I'd like to highlight for leadership is, firstly, it's about the science. Secondly, it's about the system we're in. And thirdly, it's about the speed in which we have to move. So just touching on each of those. Firstly, the science. Last week, we just saw the launch of the David Attenborough and Professor Johan Rockström Netflix film,
in 5 minutes
Breaking
time.
Boundaries. And we need to understand, and good leaders need to understand the implications of this. We are in a new stage in history, and this is an awareness, it's a consciousness about where we are in society. Earlier on today, we heard about the fact that the Leonardo Center is named after Leonardo, and the concept of the Renaissance gave us a new way of thinking. We have to think differently going into the future about where we are in the world, and the planetary boundaries work is critical to that. So good leadership is about the substance of understanding what that means. So that's the first thing. Second thing, it's actually it's the system we're in, or the systems we're in. We've built up a capital system which actually was based on an infinite planet. It's not well suited for the 21st century, where we are hitting these planetary boundaries. And we now need to recognise we need to adapt, if not change fundamentally, the systems we're in. So, for example, we're not measuring, let alone embedding, the externalities that companies are generating. You know, we don't have the right metrics for measuring corporate performance. You know, the competitiveness of sectors means that it's very easy to be a free rider. You know, those that show great leadership can often be the ones that get penalised because the free riders behind them could take advantage of that. So there's all these systemic issues we face, and great leadership has to understand these systems and work out ways to collaborate with others in the value chain to ensure that we can change it. So it's not, in my view, it's no longer good enough to be a great leader of just a single organisation where you can drive that organisation, even if you are minimising negative externalities. It's actually about changing the systems we're in to ensure that humans can live on the planet sustainably into the future. The third thing is speed. We have left it way too late to change in a smooth, transitional way. We've had 30 years to deal with climate change, and in that time, over 30 years since it became really very well known through the Hansen testimony with the US Congress. And what's happened, emissions have gone up 40% in that time. So we've left it way too late, which means now we're in the decade of transformation. This is no longer going to be just a smooth transition. If we started 30 years ago, it could have been. Now it's going to be a very disruptive and often a very bumpy ride to transform multiple sectors all at the same time. So what does that mean? It means we need leaders who understand both the science, secondly, the systems we're in, and be able to change those systems, and thirdly, move really at speed, and very, very transformational speed. So those are three things I think are very different. It goes to the heart, and also the style of leadership. The style of leadership is important and has evolved over the years. I agree with the comment earlier on, for example, about Jack Welch. You know, the style of leadership definitively has changed and needs to continue to change. But I think the substance of leadership, what leaders now need to understand and know, and what they can change in the systems and the speed at which they need to move, is very different from where we've been probably any time in history. So it's a very exciting time if you're a great leader with those attributes to be able to handle those key factors. And as back to the question about the banking sector, I think the banking sector has a very important role to play in each of these issues I've highlighted.
Thanks, everybody. Great remarks. We're almost out of time, but just briefly, there's a couple of comment questions. One's about how we shift business leaders back to focusing on humanity instead of simply profit, and how do we attract women and girls to lead. But I'd like to just maybe literally a sentence each for anyone who's got reflections going back to our kind of core message here for the role of academia and indeed the Leonardo Center. How do we change our education systems to focus on sustainability, and in this context on leadership? Anyone want to say just a briefly anything on that, Sucheta?
Yeah, very. I think the day has passed when you can say either or. Academia, organizations, communities, governments need to join hands. And we need to recruit. Education is incredibly important. I've done a lot of work myself, and the organization has done a lot of work into getting young girls into STEM subjects, and then getting them through the employability criteria into organizations and making impact. The education system has to focus on lifelong learnings, on leadership, And we have to mirror the society we operate in to ensure that we create positive impact in that society.
Mark, any final thought?
Yeah, just earlier, Lisa was saying, that she made a reference back to the Renaissance. And in the current era, we spend a lot of time making references back to the Industrial Revolution. But I think the Renaissance is more the thing that we should be looking to replicate right now. Let's bring the humanities back into our thinking about science, technology, medicine, and business, and we'll be better off.
Keith, a challenge to the Leonardo Center on leadership?
Well,
what should they do?
Yeah, look, I think it was earlier on, it was said we want to create a new generation of leaders. I think that's key. I think the next 10 years of the people going into these schools, and this is from early education right through to university and coming out of these schools, to create a whole new generation of leaders who think differently, who think we understand the context in which we now live, who are optimistic about the opportunities that can be driven. And as was said earlier on, it's not just about living within the planetary boundaries, it's actually driving a more equal and a less, with fewer inequalities in the world. So the spoils of the benefits actually get spread more evenly across the planet. That's what I think we need to do. And that I would love to see Leonardo help drive.
And Andrew, for you, finally.
Two comments. The first is we need to listen to what the younger generation want. Still, education is too top down and not enough driven from the bottom. I have great confidence in the younger generation's recognition of the need of sustainability and of different forms of leadership. So I would like universities and schools to listen more to the younger generation. My other comment: lots of different forms of leadership around the world, and we tend, most countries I think are too insular, including Britain. Just as one example, I work with Huawei, a Chinese company. It has 3 co-chief executives. That's unthinkable in America. I think America could learn from that. Equally, I think China could learn a lot from American leadership. Sometimes co-leaderships spread the responsibility. So I would like to see the Leonardo Center spread best practice, go out, look around the world at good examples of leadership and spread that to businesses, because we are stuck in our boxes.
So Andrew, Mark, Sucheta, and Keith, many thanks indeed for your great contributions. I see also some interesting remarks online, one at the end here, that a group part of civil society that we often neglect, and again perhaps something that Leonardo and others could engage with, is worldwide religious leaders as part of the wider debate, particularly on climate and sustainability, alongside the influence of business and government. So very powerful afternoon talking about challenges around leadership, around business, around society. I think a clear message here that it's not just about companies or individuals, but it's also about government and society, including civil society. We've heard a lot about the importance of guide rails, about legislation and regulation, and a lot about costs, measurement and metrics, both to assess and guide around externalities, negative and positive. So I think some key agenda items there for the Leonardo Center, for Imperial, and for academia, as well as all of those wider stakeholders that we've been discussing this afternoon. So thanks to our participants in this panel and to our previous ones and to our speakers. And we're now going to move to the final section of the event today, the call to action, with 3 different great speakers. And I'm going to hand over now at the end of my session to Mette Morsing, the head of the UN Principles for Responsible Management Education, for a few remarks. Thank you.
Warm regards and congratulations to Imperial College London for the launch of the Leonardo Center on Business for Society from PRIME, Principles for Responsible Management Education. We are the initiative of leadership education within the UN Global Compact. The Leonardo Center's founding vision of a society where companies pursue profit for societal impact parallels very well the mission of the PRIME initiative and our mission to transform management education towards responsible management and in order to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals. In our case, we are the United Nations' largest global initiative on responsible leadership education, and this means advancing research, education, and partnerships with an emphasis on educating the next generation to address the complex problem of contemporary society. There is now, more than ever, a need to put a focus on the society as the center of the stakeholder model. At the very center of that stakeholder model, we need to let our students understand that we are here as organizations, as businesses, to serve society. Academia and leadership schools in particular play a central role to develop a plan and ensure its success to achieve societal impact. And I'm delighted to say that today Prime works with more than 800 schools in 99 countries with exactly that ambition. So it is with particular delight that I today see the launch of the Leonardo Center at Imperial College with an impressive support from an internationally reputed management team of scholars and educators. And I'm also pleased to see how and to understand how the Leonardo Center as a management entity is placed in a university with technical, natural sciences, including the medical sciences, and with that potential to actually span the disciplinary silos and develop not only research that is transdisciplinary, but also education, because our students demand that. Imperial College London is well positioned to advance ideas like this. And by supporting new models of business operation and governance in the broader context of society, you are contributing to a more equitable future. The Leonardo Center can also help identify the changes that businesses must make to transform themselves and recover from the current crisis. By enabling students and faculty to collaborate with business leaders on research for sustainable solutions, you are definitely taking a big step forward. Once again, I wish you all the best for the Leonardo Center's important work in the years ahead, and I look much forward to working with you out of the Principles for Responsible Management Education initiative. Congratulations.
Thanks, Mette. Thank you very much. And thank you all really contributing to the various panels we've heard today. Really, the insights that you all have produced, I think, will stay with us and will give us real food for reflection and action. And that's where I would like to take you at this point. I would like to share with you not only the ideas about this manifesto that we're developing here at the Leonardo Center, but also the theory of change and the actual call to action that is going to underline the realization of the vision that we have. The vision has to do with logic of enterprise that will go beyond even the tenets of stakeholder capitalism the way that we consider them today. It will actually go from the negative impact on social and natural environment to positive contribution, the regeneration of the damages done over the decades to the natural environment and the damages done to society. It's the regenerative role that business enterprise can undertake, can assume, but that will require essentially a fundamental rethinking and innovation and collaborative experimentation. So how do we think about the way in which enterprise can undertake this innovative and experimental pattern? So it is important to really understand what we mean by the enterprise for the world. It is a vision that goes beyond the stakeholder orientation that is so popular, it's getting popular today. that orientation essentially says, stakeholders are essentially giving us the signals, right? So we as companies are sensitive to their interests, their needs, and we're trying to adapt. The enterprise for the world goes beyond that. The whole idea is that not only the interests and needs of stakeholders, but also the voice of the key strategic stakeholders become part of the way that the company actually strategize how they change, how they innovate, how they evolve in order to be more and more competitive and more actually contributing to the well-being of the world. Now, the key point there is to engage not only employees, customers, suppliers, and investors, but also local communities to sense, but also to ideate, to come up with ideas about how to innovate, how to adapt the processes, and also how to come up with better leadership models, better governance models, and improve also the culture of the organization. Ideate, but also select the ideas and experiment with those ideas. And learn from those experiments and then scale them up. All of these steps in the adaptation process could happen with the active, proactive engagement and support of the stakeholders. Now, this company doesn't exist today, okay? And it's probably going to take a while till it will exist. But it is important that we see that as a possible alternative for the entire private sector then to become a proactive contributor and a positive contributor for the creation of flourishing society, again, in terms of their social and environmental impacts. Now, the systemic component to this it becomes even more interesting. So it is not just the enterprise that has to make this effort. It is critical that as the process goes from the evolution of the leadership mindset all the way to the systemic change that we want to see, the other actors in society take a proactive role. So, for instance, academia, people like me, we need to rethink the way we do research and we educate current and future leaders if we want the right type of leadership traits to be taking place, to be evolving, to be then diffusing throughout the world. Investors will also have to do more than just provide their resources to the process. They will also need to rethink fundamentally their role and the way that they are organizing themselves, the way that their own organizations are actually performing across the same type of characteristics that we've seen from the business enterprise. The exponential growth of this type of form of enterprise, of this logic of enterprise to ecosystem level requires the support, of course, and the guidance from government institutions. But again, this is more than just support. It is the opportunity for any local, national, or international government institutions to also reconsider and actively reflect and innovate in their own processes, in their own systems, in their own culture and leadership models. And finally, last step, going from the enterprise ecosystem to the societal ecosystem. it's civil society, institutions, the associations that we all belong to, all the NGOs that exist to protect the rights of communities. They all need to not only give the support for this evolutionary process, but again, take the opportunity to rethink about their role and their own behaviors, so that together, collaboratively, the various societal actors can evolve in their role and produce cooperatively the flourishing society that we all aspire to. Now, in a way, this is the theory of change and the call to action for all the societal actors that we see as an implementation, fundamental image of implementation of the stakeholder capitalism logic, which was in the manifesto that the World Economic Forum announced at the very beginning, almost 50 years ago. And therefore, I'm really honored to be announcing and introducing you to Dominique Warre, Managing Director of the World Economic Forum, who is going to give us the final keynote. Thank you, Dominique. The floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, and it's great to be with you. Thank you, Maurizio. Thank you, Lise, for the kind invitation. I'm so delighted to be with you here and the terrific community you've assembled today to support the launch of Imperial College London's Leonardo Center on Business for Society. It's been a great day, and I'm very pleased to learn about the launch of this center, its vision for a flourishing society, the solutions it supports, and the innovative methodology it advances. These are all critical contributions to sustainable development and climate action, as we've been hearing in the last presentation, particularly over the next 10 years. It's a decisive decade. So it's a very timely invitation to seek how we might break those business as usual patterns and demonstrate business success with this idea of a reimagined cooperation in the 21st century. You've had some pretty good panels on that. I just want to take a few moments to unpick this a little bit and offer some thoughts, at least from a perspective personally and also from the World Economic Forum, if I may. If we start with the vision. So in response to the international community, which is kind of falling behind what it takes to deliver on the SDGs by 2030, the money isn't quite there. COVID has knocked things off course a bit. We are still facing a gap in delivering on the Paris Climate Agreement. The fact that this center envisions a new type of business, one that operates on the basis of a new logic of enterprise that aims to create just, fair, and inclusive economic development within planetary boundaries, and rewards all its key stakeholders for their contribution to human, social, financial, and natural capital. That's at the core of the issue. So the vision is absolutely spot on. It's a tough one to crack, as we've just been hearing, but it's been fascinating to note that over the last few years, this multi-dimensional understanding of the role of businesses in society, perhaps coined best as the phrase that we've heard a little bit here, stakeholder capitalism, has increasingly taken root in the business community. We're not starting from scratch. In 2019, in August, 181 CEOs of America's largest corporations, Business Roundtable, overturned their 22-year-old policy statement that defined a corporation's principal purpose as maximizing shareholder return to that of supporting stakeholder capitalism. Pretty interesting. It echoes, of course, the multi-stakeholder concept of business leadership that the founder of the World Economic Forum, Professor Klaus Schwab, extolled back in 1971, 50 years ago, and which lies at the core of the World Economic Forum as the international organization for public-private cooperation. Now, the history and context of stakeholder capitalism is set out well in his recent book, which you may have seen, and it is well worth a thumb through to see how long it takes ideas to come to fruition. Not unlike net zero or sustainability. In fact, one might sum it all up in terms of the quote from the economist Rudiger Dornbusch. In economics, things take longer to happen than you think they will, and then they happen faster than you thought they could. And I think this is the systemic change that we are starting to sense in and around the concept, the vision of stakeholder capitalism. Now, this last year or so, with the COVID pandemic, which brought many countries to an economic as well as a human crisis, and many are still grappling around the world, It's also brought increased political and social attention to environmental, social, and governance issues and the wider value. I think it's accelerated the reimagination for the role of business and economics in society. Have phrases like build back better, the Great Reset, and of course, stakeholder capitalism, such like. So we're in the thick of this change, this decadal transition, when things certainly do happen faster than you think they can. For example, during the pandemic, more than 1,200 organizations came together in 40 projects and initiatives, which the World Health Organization asked for, a COVID action platform, which the World Economic Forum helped support. They worked on initiatives ranging from securing global supply chains to tackling mobility challenges during the lockdown and increasing confidence in vaccines. Put that against the backdrop of how difficult it was for G7 and G20 countries to come together in a unified way. There was public-private mobilization, a new kind of stakeholder capitalism against a fabric of increased strain of traditional multilateral cooperation. And I would dare say that that experience has also helped sharpen the focus of corporate climate action. Many companies are now taking on those targets to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Standard & Poor's, for example, suggests that at least 20% of the 2,000 largest public listed net zero goals. And crucially, many of them are also setting clear short and medium term interim targets. A really good example of this scale of corporate mobilization for climate ambition is the development of the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, GFANZ, quite a strange acronym, but chaired by Mark Carney, who spoke earlier. The Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero has brought together over 160 organizations from the financial services community. They're collectively responsible for over $70 trillion of revenue under management, and their combined goal is to accelerate that transition. That's a significant mobilization. We wouldn't have been able to anticipate that 5 years ago. Things happen quicker than you think they can. But as we just heard, it takes more than the individual corporate, more than one company's ambition to deliver these systemic change goals. Not one company, not one government, not even many actors all working individually in their own organizations will get this done. Rather, it requires the mobilization of systems, ecosystems of companies working across global value chains. This is what makes it really interesting for the Leonardo Center. It takes just 8 global supply chains, which account for more than 50% of global emissions, according to research from the Boston Consulting Group, electronics, automotives, construction, things like this. And yet 40% of their emissions could be mitigated at less than €10 through innovations that work right across those value chains. This means larger companies working with smaller companies, their suppliers, their networks, their customers, a systems change. Furthermore, if the expensive technology interventions, like scaling green hydrogen, are also factored into the whole, then decarbonization would actually not put too much cost on the end consumer. Costs would go up by maybe 1 to 4%, according to that analysis. Consumers buying a net zero car with a price tag of €30,000 would perhaps pay €500 more. A $40 pair of jeans might cost $1 more. So you can see how, by working as a system, we can actually make this transition at scale and affordable, and where the public policy piece might come in. Because as mentioned, government action to help accelerate and scale systems change is critical. Governments representing about 60% of global greenhouse gas emissions have now set net zero goals or mid-century carbon neutrality goals across their jurisdiction. So COP26, coming up in November in Glasgow, was going to be a very, very important milestone where this private sector action meets this public sector action. And if they can connect across systems change arenas, we could be in business to get that decade of delivery back on track. That takes us to the second point that we set out in the manifesto for the Leonardo Center, which is about solutions to realize that vision of stakeholder capitalism. And the good news is that the appetite for public-private collaboration, we feel, exists and is rising fast. There's a very tasty menu now out there of examples to choose from in terms of collaborations and scale efforts. There's a range of very nice dishes containing proofs of concept of large-scale alliances, collaborations, and public-private activities each of which are experiments in themselves, but collectively they can offer guidance on how to get this sustainability system change job done. And we sorely need this. And this idea that the Leonardo Center has to gather evidence and look carefully at various methodologies is very exciting. I'll give you some examples. The Global Plastic Action Partnership, which came out of the Canadian G7 in 2018, works on the eradication of plastic pollution through several country partnerships, including Indonesia, brings governments, business, investors together to make roadmaps come alive. The Mission Possible Partnership brings together over 300 companies and expert organizations, including the most influential global leaders in industrial decarbonization, finance, policy, and business. It's triggering systems change across sectors in the 7 most carbon-intensive industries, underpinned by best-in-class net zero roadmaps. Aluminium, aviation, trucking, cement, steel, chemicals, these kinds of sectors where it's been traditionally hard to get the sector to work together to get to an abatement curve in line with what the science is telling us. These Mission Possible Partnership net zero industry platforms have growing momentum, investor pressure, and consumer expectations. We're gearing together across the Rocky Mountain Institute, the We Mean Business Coalition, the Energy Transition Commission, strategic partnerships with the IEA, together with ourselves at the World Economic Forum, to deliver these packages into Glasgow. These are ambitious undertakings, and strong partnership opportunities are possible with the Leonardo Center. Sorts of activities related to it. Collaborative actions going on in water. Bank with the 2030 water resources, water insecure countries, 400 stakeholders, including large businesses and SMEs. Tropical forest protection, forest over 350 companies from the Forum, nations, developers who are interested in protecting and stripping out commodities like oil, soy, in oceans, and in restoration of ecosystems, a Trillion Trees initiative, 1T.org. And just last week, ahead of the G7 meeting, close to 80 CEOs are the members of the Alliance of CEO Climate Leaders. It's a group worth about $2.2 trillion, about Italy's GDP, employs about 7 million people. They put forward an open letter to G7 leaders calling for collaboration on stronger policies to do with energy subsidies removal, to do with carbon pricing, and to do with scaling innovation. So there is activity in this space, and things are starting to happen. This is where at the World Economic Forum for our Center for the Future Earth, we try to bring these things together. And the potential for collaboration with the Leonardo Center across this growing trend to dissect, to look at, to create methodologies, to analyze is huge. Behavioral identified, in-depth analysis of just the quantity of those transformational efforts, sustainability indices to study the effectiveness of different behavioral strategies, and in particular, and where we'd be very excited to discuss further with this new center, experimentation to pilot novel initiatives to bring together academics, policymakers, and business labs. So the Leonardo Center's collabs are a very, very exciting introduction. We're already at the World Economic Forum delighted with the substantive collaboration on innovation and the fourth industrial revolution with Imperial College, notably through your president, Alice Gast, who has a role as the academic co-chair of the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution Advisory Board. We'd love to build on that experience as we construct collaboration with the Leonardo Center. Suffice to say, as you've heard throughout the program so far, there is a lot going on. We are at that tipping point. We're not looking for it. It's on us. There is a lot to dissect and get our teeth into. More needs to be done. It's the perfect time for the launch of the Leonardo Center. And this combination of a strong vision, a scientific platform to support collaborative problem solving, and find bold new methodologies really does, in my opinion, make the Leonardo Center stand out. So on behalf of the World Economic Forum, I'm really pleased to support the Center's call to action and sustainable development through the reimagination of business for societal impact. And we look forward very much to collaborating with the Leonardo Center on this hugely important mission in the decade ahead of us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Dominique. I can hardly imagine a better finale for this wonderful day that we've all enjoyed. You have given us not only the vision of the World Economic Forum, but so many concrete examples in which businesses, institutions, and academia have been already collaborating. And you're absolutely right. We have reached a point where the collaboration has to transition towards experimentation. We need to actually get from the guidance, from the principles, which are all absolutely important and necessary, to the actual action. And innovative action requires strong, well-designed, scientifically designed, and powerfully implemented experiments before then the innovations can be adequately scaled, not only throughout the organization, but throughout the whole system. So thanks so much, Dominique, but also thanks every one of the speakers and keynotes throughout the day. Let me make it very clear. There's no way that I can do justice to the wealth of insights, of suggestions, of deep, thoughtful comments. I have pages already written down, and I can assure everyone that all the researchers and the faculty connected to the Leonardo Center are going to take heedful note of everything that has already been emerged, but also that will be the basis for the future collaboration. And that's where I would like to leave this day with a vote of thanks to every one of you who have taken 3.5 hours of your precious time. We understand that these days this is a huge ask, and we're really grateful for your decision to give us that much time of yours. We also would like to thank, the business school at Imperial College, without which we just wouldn't exist as a center. The Imperial College in its whole capacity and all the research centers that have been active for many, many years, some for decades, that have embraced our idea and have been grateful and actually gracious enough to collaborate with us. Thank you so much for all the people that have helped organize this event. And I really look forward to working with all of you who are listening and all of you who have spoken already in the coming years. We have a lot of work to do, as it has already been said, and we can only do it together. Thank you so much. Bye-bye now.
Humans have achieved incredible things, but we have taken our planet to the brink. And now the primary risk to our own survival is ourselves. It's time to change. In order to thrive and survive in a new age, we must redesign a path to progress that respects the intertwined fate of people and planet. The Leonardo Center on Business for Society, established by Imperial College, sees a world where companies work for a more sustainable tomorrow. Here we explore and experiment with the transition of sustainable and inclusive logics of enterprise. As Leonardo da Vinci had a vision of perfection in man, we are developing a leadership ideal to shape a new direction. At the Leonardo Center, we will innovate and co-create a new logic of business enterprise to deliver the world we want. We will redesign systems to be environmentally, socially, and economically regenerative. With 15 Imperial College research centers and a global community of 150 scholars, we will pull from the most brilliant scientific and business expertise. Using the world's largest machine learning dataset on corporate sustainability behaviors, We can connect the dots and shift behaviours where science tells us. Business can pave the way to a more sustainable future. And at the Leonardo Center on Business for Society, we're taking the lead. Join us today.